As the title suggests, I will try to make with you a journey from the Arabic science of compound medicaments as represented by the Kitāb al-Malakī and its Latin reception via translation, in particular by Constantine the African. Um, of course, we need to start from the Kitāb al-Malakī, which is the medical encyclopedia composed by Ali ibn al-Abbas al-Maǧūsī. We do not know much about this author. The nisbas that accompany his name in the manuscripts ascribe his origin to different cities, but all located in the province of Fars. We also know from al-Maǧūsī's words that he was a pupil of Abu Mahir ibn Musa ibn Yusuf ibn Sayyar, who is so to say, an unknown physician again, but who must have been a prominent practitioner in 10th century, in the 10th century Fars province. Also, thanks to al-Maǧūsī's own words, we know that at some point he was also active in Baghdad, and especially in the hospital al-Badri. But probably most of the time he was active in the province of Fars, and again, thanks to the Kitāb, we know that he was familiar with the renowned and also problematic institution of the hospital in Gundishapur. During my PhD research, I've also stumbled upon a manuscript actually from Istanbul, where there is a note according to which al-Mađūsī finished writing the Kitāb al-Malakī, his work, in what corresponds to our years 977-978. His major work is the Kitāb al-Malakī, which translated into English would be the Royal Book. And this is really a massive encyclopedia of some hundreds of folia in manuscripts, composed of two parts, theory and practice, both consisting of 10 books, so for a 20 of total. The science of compound medicaments is discussed by al-Mađūsī in book 10th of the practical section, so this is precisely the end, let's say, of the encyclopedia. And again, in the frame of my PhD, I have tried to update the existing lists of the manuscript of the Kitāb al-Malakī, and so far I have been able to find 16 medieval copies that preserve this book 10. I have made here a list, not just to show the names of the manuscript, but also to show to you that this book 10 of the practical section did not only circulate within the entire medical encyclopedia, as in the first cases that you see here, but also as part of the practical section alone, and maybe even more interestingly, as a sort of detached monograph, either together with book 9 of the practical section, which is surgical content, or also as a single detached monograph about compound medicaments already in early times in the 12th century. For the purpose of my presentation, since the Kitāb is to present unedited, I have started consulting some of the most ancient manuscripts, also based on the availability, but of course in the future a complete collection would be desired or necessary. What can we found in this book on compound medicaments within the Kitāb al-Malakī? To give you an idea of the, let's say, entirety of this book, I would like to show to you the table of contents. As you can see, this book does not, let's say, start with recipes, but it is introduced by an epistemological or theoretical introduction, because the first chapter is dedicated to the reasons why physicians need at all to compose and use compound medicines. We will get back to this later. While chapter 2 discusses the rules that a physician can resort to in order to understand and establish how much of any simples he needs in terms of respective weights to make a compound. Book 3 concerns the preparation of single substances that are most extensively used in the case of preparations. And then from from chapter 4 on, there is then the actual discussion of different types of compound medicaments, starting with the teriac, and then going on to a wide variety of them. Sorry, I cannot change the slide. Why? Okay, now yes, now it works. So
Anna,
after
if I may
teriac,
interrupt, attention because we can barely see you.
okay.
Thank you.
Apart from the teriac, we also have, for example, purgative decoctions, herrings, but then a wider variety of enemas, suppositories, emetics, pastilles, stomachics, powders, ointments, syrups, condiments, gems, collyria, eye salves, and then a series of medicaments that are meant to cure some specific diseases, for example, to heal wounds, tumors, nosebleed, diseases of the mouth, but also medicine against fatness or obesity, against cutaneous affection, and what in Greek is termed kissa, this form of, let's say, bad desires that sometimes affect pregnant women. I have tried to show you this overall picture because this gives an idea of how wide and complex this book is, and this is actually not only an impression. If we try to locate the Kitāb al-Malakī within the tradition of the Akrabadin in the Arabic medical history, we can appreciate its importance. Akrabadin is actually a noun that comes from the Greek graphidion, a sort of list, and it is the name that was the title that was given to monographs or texts concerning compound medicaments in the Arabic tradition, which has been mainly studied by Martin Levey and Leaf. I'm sorry if I mispronounced the name, Chipman. This discussion of compound medicaments can be found either as independent works or, as it is the case in the Kitāb al-Malakī, as section of within encyclopedias that contain a list of compound medicaments, usually organized as in the Kitāb al-Malakī, so that each chapter is devoted to a specific type of preparation, but they can also be organized alphabetically. The main model for this kind of work is clearly Galen's De Compositione Medicamentorum, but the variety is really noticeable. And based on the study devoted to Chipman, to one of these works, the Minhaj al-Dukhan, we can see and appreciate that the Kitāb al-Malakī, when compared to the other lists of compound remedies, presents the biggest number of recipes for almost all kinds of medicaments. Chipman makes a comparative table from which we can appreciate, for example, that the Kitāb is way richer than the Kanun, just to make a famous name, the canon for the Latin tradition. Quoting Chipman, indeed, composing a pharmacopoeia was for Arabic authors a creative project because they could choose between different structurings of the subject. There was no fixed, let's say, norm, no defined order. But I would say that for al-Maǧūsī, it was also an epistemological one because it's actually probably the one, but of course, new sources could be found, so I don't know. But it seems to be one of the few that felt the need to defend and legitimate the preparation of compound medicaments from from a theoretical perspective, and that's what he does at the beginning of the of book 10. As I've been able to see studying the Kitāb al-Malakī, al-Maģūsī is often highly dependent on earlier sources. For example, Galen's commentary on Hippocrates' works, but also on the Alexandrian reworkings of Galen's books. Actually, for this introduction to the science of compound medicaments, it is difficult to pinpoint a possible source. I believe that in any case, that the beginning, let's say, of the tradition that led to the Kitāb al-Malakī resides in the preface or in the beginning, the first chapter of Galen's De Compositione Medicamentorum per Genera, which in the first chapters, as we shall see, discusses some theoretical subjects. For example, why do the effects exerted by certain substances vary under given conditions? Also the polemic against the empiricists who deny the need for compound medicaments, but also why compound medicaments are beneficial. There is no exact correspondence between the texts, but as we shall see, this is probably the tradition that inspires or that reaches at some point the Kitāb al-Malakī. The Composizione Medicamentorum per Genera was indeed translated into Arabic. As far as I have seen from previous studies, this has not been edited. In the Arabic translation has not been edited, and it is also not completely preserved because the first books lack in the manuscript that have it, according to the studies that have been done so far. So I've not been able to compare also the Arabic translation of the text. I need to rely on the Greek. But in any case, I've tried to assemble here some passages that are relevant for comparison with the Kitāb al-Malakī. In the beginning of the composizione, Galen explains that his book will also be useful to show how empiricists have a sort of philoneikia, a love for disputes, because even when they are faced with the fact that medicaments, and especially compound medicaments, can have a different effect on different bodies, they renounce accepting this and accepting the utility of compound medicaments, referring them to mere dreams or chance, so to say. For example, when faced with a medicament like the kefalikos, they just say that in it are mixed all substances that can produce flesh to cure wounds, even if when they are faced, let's say, with some problems concerning why, for example, the verdigris mixed with cerate makes a flesh-growing medicament, when it actually isn't as such alone, they cannot accept this and give an answer. This is the origin of a polemics that will reach the Kitāb al-Malakī. In chapter 3 of this introduction, Galen also explains why there can be a benefit in compound medicaments. For example, there are cases when when a physician needs a single self-grown medicament with which something is mixed in order to milden the excess of its strength, or sometimes to palliate its nauseousness or inacceptability to the patient. The greatest benefit of compound medicaments, according to Galen, can be found in the case when compounds are used against the diseases that require different faculties at the same time. In some cases, even the opposite faculties, which are both useful to cure a given disease. Finally, Galen also acknowledges that there can be, for example, benefit in the composition of medicaments when a physician needs a single medicament against, for example, many of the poisonous animals or the lethal drugs. In the Kitāb al-Malakī, in the preface of the Kitāb al-Malakī, we find exactly some of these, let's say, some of these main tenets of Galen's ideas, but transformed, so to say, into a didascalic discussion that may be more easily understandable and also easier to learn for a student. Indeed, al-Maǧūsī opens this discussion on compound medicaments by stating that ancient physicians upheld two views on the composition of compounds. One view was held by those who relied on experimentation, the other was held by those who relied on reasoning. And of course, this is the contrast between empiric and logic physician that was already staged by Galen. And then we read that those who favored reasoning believed that single medicaments were not sufficient to cure all diseases, and that for three reasons: the nature of illnesses and diseases, the affected body parts, and the nature of the single medicaments. Here you can start to appreciate the, let's say, classificatory attitude of the Kitāb al-Malakī, because anything can be explained by a list of reasons. In this case, a physician, when faced with the nature of diseases, the nature of the body parts, and the nature of single medicaments, may be, let's say, led back to the need of a compound medicaments. The classificatory and didascalic approach can become even more complex or pervasive if we go into any of these specific reasons that might lead to the composition of compounds. For example, concerning the use by physician of compound medicines because of diseases, this can be because of four things. One of them is because of differences in the amounts by which a complexion is corrupt. The second is because of the strength and severity of the disease. The third is because of differences in the condition of the disease. And the fourth is because of resistance to different diseases. Of course, then there is an exemplification and an explanation of all of these cases or possibilities. Concerning, for example, the use of compound medicines because of their resistance against different diseases, it may be that the physician needs a single medicine that fights many diseases of different natures and resists animal poisons and lethal drugs. This is exactly the same topic or argument that we found in Galen. And indeed, this is exemplified by al-Maǧūsī, by the use of the teriac, which is exactly the same medicament that Galen quotes also with reference to this fact of having one single medicament against many poisons or many drugs. There are, however, points in this list or arguments for the composition of medicines that cannot be so precisely led back to this source. For example, the second of the three main reasons that we have seen that compel the physician to use a compound resides in the body parts, and it is so again due to two things. One is the location of the body part, and the other is the strength and usefulness of this body part. As for the location of the part, when the affected part is far from the stomach, we need to add to the single medicine that is beneficial for a given disease another medicine that carries it and delivers it to the affected part quickly, so that its penetration does not slow down and its strength dissolves. This is an argument that I have not been able to find in Galen, and which will play a certain important role also in the reception by Constantine the African, as we shall see. The classificatory attitude can become even more complex. For example, when al-Maǧūsī explains the third reason for which it is needed to make a compound medicine, which is because of the nature of single medicines. And here al-Mađūsī lists 8 other further reasons. I will spare you the reading, but I believe this shows you how, like in a branch, any moment of this reasoning is, let's say, structured into points that have a clear didascalic, let's say, in purpose, I believe. At the end of this complex explanation of why logic physicians are right in defending the use of compound medicaments, al-Mađūsī also recalls a possible doubt that can be raised against this series of arguments. And this is a doubt, again, on the possibility of the compound medicaments and their exerting a beneficial action, which sounds in this way. If the medicine that a person takes goes to the stomach, from the stomach to the small intestine, from there to the mesenteries, and from the mesenteries to the liver, and then to all the other body parts, how can it be said that some compound medicines are beneficial for many diseases in different body parts? Probably the rationale behind this is that through this digestive process, the proper faculty of the medicine may be, let's say, diluted or lost, preventing it to reach parts that are, let's say, located in far parts of the body. Al-Mađūsī also gives a solution to this doubt, namely that the diseased body parts have the faculty of desiring and thus attracting to them what will cure them through this digestive process or interfering in it. Whatever the origin of this dispute in al-Mađūsī, I wanted to read you this passage because again it will be crucial also in the reading of the translation that Constantine gives of this section. As I mentioned before, the second chapter of the Kitāb of this book 10 of the Kitāb al-Malakī is devoted to how a physician can assess the respective weights of the single medicaments that are put in a compound. And also in this case, of course, the reasons are considered to be twofold. There can be individual reasons and also a combination of reasons. And the individual reasons are divided and listed as 7 in number. Again, I will spare you the reading of this list, but this is an example, a further example of the explanatory attitude. And then there is also the possibility of combining these rules. And again, al-Maǧūsī gives 12 possible cases. Just to give you an idea of what they consist of, I will read the last part of this passage. One of these is the case in which the stronger medicine, so a very strong medicine, is also beneficial. And in this case, you should use only an average amount of it, because it should not be added in too large quantities due to its being very strong. But it should also not be reduced because it is also very beneficial. In this case, you have two, let's say, considerations, two faculties of the medicament that you have to combine, so to say, in assessing the weight. Finally, I just wanted to give you an idea of what can be found in the third chapter, which is the one devoted to how to prepare the single substances that are used very often in compounds, mostly to make the other actually effective drugs to coalesce or to unite with one another. And this is the case with honey. If it is a medicine mixed with honey, then one should choose a good, pure, sweet-smelling honey, which, when you take some of it with your finger and they make it flow, then the honey does not stop flowing. Then the honey should be boiled until its foam rises, and the foam is removed if necessary. For each of the crushed, dissolved, and weighted medicines, take 3 times as much honey if it is winter, and if it is summer, twice as much and half that amount. Then the honey should be poured over the gum dissolved in wine and stirred until smooth. Then the crushed medicines should be sprinkled over it, and the whole stirred with a pestle until smooth. Transfer it to a silver or Chinese clay pot, not full but leaving 4 fingers space at the top, as the electrolyte may boil and ascend, and it will have no place to breathe, so to say, so it may spoil, and the vessel may break if it is hot. Rather, the vessel should be uncovered every so often to allow the vapor of the medicine to escape and breathe until it stops boiling. This is just to give you an idea of how let's say specific this description is. It was even difficult for me as a not English speaker to translate it into proper English because there is a lot of technical terminology, and I probably failed in this attempt. But this is also to give you an idea of the challenges that a Latin translator like Constantine had to face when he tried, and we will see how to translate this passage. With this reference to Constantine, we will try to move on to the second part of the presentation, which is mainly devoted to him. As I have already mentioned at the beginning, after this chapter 3, then al-Maǧūsī begins with proper listing the recipes of the compound medicaments. And also to this we will go back to at the end of the presentation together with Constantine. You may already be familiar with the, let's say, activity by Constantine the African, so I won't say so much about it. Constantine, originally from Africa, was active in Salerno/Monte Cassino in the second half of the 11th century. And of course, as an Arabic into Latin translation or translator of medical works, he translated really a huge amount of works, among which the Kitāb al-Malakī. In 11th and 12th century manuscripts, we find copies that contain mostly his translation of the theoretical part of the Kitāb al-Malakī, which he translated in full. While of the practical section, we were certain that he translated at least book 1 and 2 and part of book 9. Recently, in the last years, Monica Green found evidence of translations by Constantine, also, if I remember correctly, of book 3, 6, and 7. And it is to Yolanda Ventura that we owe the identification of a manuscript in Toledo, in the Biblioteca Capitular, where there is also a translation, probably by Constantine the African, of the last book of the practical section of the Kitāb al-Malakī, namely this book 10 with antidotes. This translation of book 10 occupies the first 46 folio of this Toledo manuscript, which, as far as we know, is the unique copy of this translation. Actually, in the copy, there is no title and no mention of the author, only a later hand added a reference to the Practica Pantegni, because indeed, when a complete Practica Pantegni was restructured, we do not know when, but in any case, in 13th century manuscript, this book 10 was later incorporated as also book 10 of this reconstructed Practica, but I will not discuss this final stage of the transmission. The Toledo manuscript contains also other works, for example, the Liber Aureus ascribed to Afflacius, but also other translation by Constantine, like the Liber Pauperum, and also a series of treatises whose title, for example, Liber Antidotorum, Liber Potionum Dulcium, may suggest that they still have to do with this translation of Book 10, but since I only obtain a partial reproduction of the manuscript, I cannot say for sure. Then there is also the De Stomaco, another translation by Constantine, and an unknown, the Oles. The manuscript is datable to the 12th century, and based on the partial reproductions of folio 1 to 46 that I received, there is some inversion of the folia in it, for sure, but only an autoptic, let's say, exam would allow me to assess the completely correct order of the folia, but this is just for caution. And I will not show you photos because I have been asked by the library not to leave photos of the manuscript on the internet. In any case, as I have said, there is no title that makes sure that this translation is by Constantine the African, but if one reads it, it becomes clear that its source was the Kitāb al-Malakī, and the lexicon, let's say, sounds like that used by Constantine the African, also in the first sentence. Indeed, the first chapter is a rather literal version of the Kitāb al-Malakī, of the first chapter of the Kitāb al-Malakī. And here you can see how the translation begins with this adjective bifarius, which, like trifarius, quadrifarius, and so on, is especially loved by Constantine the African when he has to translate these lists given by al-Maǧūsī, in this case concerning the fact that the composition of medicaments can be understood in two ways. One is that of the logic physician, and one is that of the empiricist physician. Constantine, in this first chapter, maintains the didascalic approach of the Arabic text, I wouldn't say one-to-one, but almost, and translates all the lists given by al-Maǧūsī, displaying also an effort in making them understandable, in understanding them and making them understandable through the addition of explanatory remarks. These remarks can be also very, let's say, basic or simple. For example, as we have seen, there is a passage in which al-Mađūsī tries to explain why one would need to find medicaments with reference to the natures of the body parts, especially taking into account the strength and utility of these body parts. Here you can see a translation, my translation of the Arabic. The invention of medicaments can be due to the strength, in Arabic quwwa, and benefit of the body part, because if a tumor affects an important body part, like the stomach, for example, a medicament is needed to strengthen them and maintain them properly functioning even when they are, let's say, affected and undergo the action of the properly effective medicament. And in the Latin translation, this idea of strength and benefit of the body part is translated as nobilitas, so nobility of the action exerted by it, in order to make clear that one has to, for example, to preserve the stomach, it is because the function exerted by the stomach cannot be stopped, not even for a moment, when it undergoes the action of the medicament. In the preceding passage, which I have also transcribed in the slide, I just wanted to show to you how we can see some lexicon proper to Constantine, not only in the general, let's say, theoretical discussion, but also in the names of medicaments, because the translation of saffron as Crocus orientalis can be found also in his other translations. In the Kitāb al-Malakī, as we have seen again, it is explained that compound medicaments may be invented also by taking into account the natures of the diseases that need to be counteracted. And one possibility is that there are differences in the amount or in the measures by which a specific complexion is bad. And this is exemplified by al-Maǧūsī, by a disease which requires a heating medicament in the second grade. And the solution is that if you have one simple heating in the first grade and one simple heating in the third grade, if they are combined, then you obtain a medicament heating in the second grade, which is exactly what you need. In the translation by Constantine the African, this idea is maintained rather faithfully, and the passages that I have highlighted in bold are some sort of explanatory remarks that are embedded by Constantine in the translation because they have no parallel in the Arabic, and which are meant to make even clearer to the reader this idea of grades of the medicaments, which he was also one of the first to introduce into the Latin word. For example, the explanation is we are compelled to compose in that quantity, which may offer resistance to the quantity of the bad complexion, when a simple medicament that is called in the same grade cannot be found as an opponent. And in this way, a simple medicament of the first and a simple medicament of the third are seen to be directed to the second grade. He repeats what he had already stated while translating the Kitāb al-Malakī a second time. But the intervention by Constantine the African in the text can be, let's say, more interesting for the researcher than this. And we can observe this in a number of cases. One possibility is when, one interesting case is when Constantine tries to explain why compound medicaments are invented by taking into account the nature of the simple medicaments and especially the necessity or the need to reduce their horribilitas, their hideousness, and the fact that they cause nausea to the patient, so that he may be able to take them. And in this case, something of good smell and taste needs to be added. The example given by al-Maǧūsī is the following. As Hippocrates mixes with black hellebore the daucus, or seed of the mountain celery, and we ourselves, nahnu, mix aniseed with scammony. Nahnu in Arabic and we in the English translation, he refers to, I suppose, the Arabic physician practicing in his own time, or maybe it's a pluralis majestatis, meaning me, myself, al-Maģūsī. In any case, it refers to some, let's say, more modern physician than Hippocrates or Galen. In the translation by Constantine the African, this is explained by stating that sometimes it is necessary to give a horribilem medicinam et abominabilem, to which you add something good smelling and good tasting, just as Hippocrates did, mixing black hellebore with parsnip and Galen with aniseed and scammony. Of course, it may be that in some Arabic manuscripts that I have not checked yet, there is Galen here, but this is probably not the case. I believe that it was especially Constantine who felt the need to substitute the we, the nos in Latin, with an authority like Galen. And I believe he did so because also in the work I did for my thesis, in any case where in the Arabic text there is some mention of the innovation or changes introduced by modern physicians with respect to Greek masters, Constantine feels the need to smooth this out in his translation and to, let's say, underline that he is following authority in any way. Maybe the easiest or the most easy to find case of this is already in the preface to the Pantegni, where in the Arabic it is stated that the physicians of Iraq and Fars, so nowadays physicians, use different medicines than Hippocrates and Galen to cure acute diseases and pleurisy especially. Constantine substitutes this physician of Iraq and Fars with nos, probably meaning new physicians in his translation. So he maintains this idea, but he also feels the need to add to the Arabic this sentence. However, in so doing, we do not shun authority, because we just follow the same precepts while considering the different locations of the regions. This explanatory sentence, which underlines that he is anyway following authority, is not present in the Arabic, and I believe this is part of this general attitude of stating that we are not changing what the Greek masters taught us. And so, in this case, the examples are taken from ancient times and not from modern ones. Another intervention, which is maybe even more interesting by Constantine the African on the original text of the Practica on the medicaments, concerns this final doubt that we have read also in the Kitāb al-Malakī. If you remember, al-Maǧūsī stated that there are people who, especially empiricist physicians, who say that if the potion which is taken goes through the entire digestive process, then its action may be lost. Constantine translates this question rather faithfully, I would say, but then the answer is completely different. Because he states that, of course, based into inquiry into the truth, it is necessary to give an answer to this empirical physician. And here is the answer. Some acknowledge that only the faculty of the medicament reaches the diseased body parts, while its substance remains in the stomach. Some say that the faculty of the medicament does not penetrate by its own force, but the weak body parts attract it to themselves. However, we state that it is not possible for the quality of any substance, especially that quality which is always inherent in it, to go away from the substance, and why the substance has been left alone to go to other body parts. We see that in the case of the magnet, that attracts to itself the substance of iron, not the mere quality of iron, and so on and so forth. Whence, if the medicament is attracted to individual body parts, not its mere faculty, but also the substance itself will be attracted. As you can see, this has nothing to do with the answer given by al-Maǧūsī. This is an even more theoretically complex discussion of how substance and faculties interact or act or come into play when a compound medicament is taken by a patient, so to say. And this, of course, is something I believe remarkable, because as far as I could see, I could not find an earlier, maybe Latin source from which Constantine may have taken this answer to adapt it to the Kitāb al-Malakī. And of course, this reasoning on the interplay between substance and quality is something rather, let's say, complex also from the perspective of natural philosophy. And this is not only so because in this same answer to the Arabic doubt, Constantine the African embeds other possible doubts. For example, some sophists may raise other objections concerning the use of compound medicaments. how it is possible that the weak body parts attract to themselves something that is similar, if the weak body parts usually draw to themselves what is similar, how it is possible that they desire medicines that are even dissimilar and contrary to them. And also in this case an answer is given. And finally, a third doubt remains to be solved. Why do the weakened body parts draw to themselves purgative potions when they do not desire them, but rather dread them? This seems a form of, let's say, question as a form of Q&A or disputatio that was raised by the reading of the Kitāb al-Malakī, and that is reported in Constantine translation of it. I don't know. I'm still thinking about it. The only thing that I can add is that this is not an entirely isolated case in the translation by Constantine that I have studied so far, because also in the theoretical section of the Pantegni, there is a case in which Constantine adds, actually, an entire chapter to the Kitāb al-Malakī, where also there is this, let's say, interplay of possible critiques and answers given by Constantine. This can be found in Book 10 of the theoretical section of the Pantegni, which is the one devoted to prognosis. And this book is actually, for the most part, modeled on the Kitāb al-Malakī. It is a precise translation of the Kitāb al-Malakī. But in chapter 9, Constantine says, well, what we read in the Kitāb al-Malakī concerning critical days is not enough. So I will add another chapter composed by me. Actually, it goes back to different Arabic sources. And at the end of this new discussion of critical days, again, Constantine says, well, there are homines sicut sophistes that raise against me certain objections, and here is the answer that I can give. So probably this is not an entirely, let's say, foreign attitude to the translation by Constantine, which for the most part still remain to be investigated, I think. To go to the end of the presentation, in Constantine, then after this, let's say, new doubt embedded into the Kitāb al-Malakī, the following chapters on the ways of the single ingredients and how to prepare and administer certain symbols before inserting them into the compound are rather faithfully translated. And I've tried to show this in the case of honey. This is the short Latin passage that corresponds to the longer Arabic one that I read before. And this is so because Constantine usually tries, let's say, to simplify a little bit what he is reading. For example, the entire preparation concerning the foam of the honey is left aside, and also in the end the process of let's say leaving the oil to boil is also, let's say, reduced to a shorter discussion. But in general the correspondence is clear to the Kitāb al-Malakī. This is true until the discussion of how to prepare oil on folio 5 of the manuscript, and from there the text does not correspond anymore, at least partially, to the Kitāb al-Malakī. Why? Because in the following list of recipes for antidotes, Constantine seems to have collected different sources, because some recipes correspond to those given in the Kitāb al-Malakī, even if they are mentioned in a completely different order, while others can be found in late antique or early medieval antidotaries, as I've been able to ascertain thanks to the help of Professor Ferraces Rodriguez, with whom I was accidentally while I started this study. For example, this is the first antidote that is given in the Toledo manuscript, the Antidotarium Adriani Magnum, which can be found in a rather similar form in this Vatican manuscript, the Barberenianus Latinus 160, which is a collection of earlier Latin antidotes. This is just one case, there are many others. For example, this Benedicta Poxio, of course, doesn't come from the Kitāb al-Malakī, but from earlier collection of recipes. The Dia Margaritum Magnum can be found in a manuscript from Monte Cassino, which also contains earlier collection of antidotes. But this is not always the case. Here I have another example, but this is not always the case because, for example, the recipe for Tyriac or the description of the Tyriac that occupies foglia 9 to 11 of the Toledo manuscripts corresponds to the Kitāb al-Malakī, is clearly taken from the Kitāb al-Malakī. For example, as can be seen by this, let's say, transcription that I have made, the beginning, the Teriac is a very glorious antidote and it cures those bitten by deadly animals. It's exactly the same that al-Maǧūsī says. The name of the inventor, Madius, is the same of the Kitāb al-Malakī, and then also the discussion of why it is called Teriac. The most complex cases, maybe, are those in which the Kitāb al-Malakī quotes a recipe which has clearly Greek origin. And so, in those cases, Constantine could find in the Kitāb al-Malakī the Arabic version of something that was also already available in Latin in early medieval antidotaries. This is the case, for example, of the recipe of a sotira with a crocomagma that should be added to it, that Constantine could find in earlier Latin antidotaries, but also transliterated as crocomagma something into Arabic. And in I believe in an intelligent way, he understands that this transliteration in the Kitāb al-Malakī is what in Latin was crocomagma. So he recognizes, let's say, the Greek origin of this medicament and uses it as a translation, which is indeed not what the other translator of the Kitāb al-Malakī does, Stephen of Antioch, who transliterates the Arabic without recognizing in any way that this is only an Arabic version of a Greek original. I believe that this final overview concerning also the transliteration of the given recipes shows why studying and editing this text will be very complex, but also very interesting because it is located precisely at the crossroads of Greek, Arabic, and Latin medicine. Moreover, for the broader picture of understanding what Constantine the African thought while he was translating, I believe that this case of the antidotes clearly explains why Constantine the African, in the preface to the Pantegni, states that the author of the book is not al-Maǧūsī, but the author of the book is Constantine, because he is because he is a collector, a coadunator from the books of many. Indeed, while he was translating the Kitāb al-Malakī, he embedded into it additional passages that came from a variety of sources, maybe, possibly, also from discussions that were made on the Kitāb al-Malakī, and which remain still to be studied, let's say.